It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday night in the quiet suburb of Maplewood. The streets were lined with cozy houses, every porch light softly glowing under the pale moon. Inside number 47, Mark and Helen were winding down after a long day. The television hummed quietly, the kettle whistled for tea, and outside, the front light burned brighter than usual. It was a small detail, but one they ignored completely as they headed upstairs to sleep. Midnight came, and the neighborhood slipped into silence, all except their house. Their porch remained bathed in light, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Across the street, an old man walking his dog paused, staring at the glow. Something about it felt wrong, too bright, too steady. The shadows it cast didn't move with the wind. They seemed to pulse, almost breathe. Inside, Mark stirred in his sleep. The faint hum of electricity filled the air, low but constant. He rolled over, annoyed by the subtle buzzing sound coming from downstairs. When he finally opened his eyes, he noticed something strange. A faint shimmer of light reflected on the bedroom wall. It was moving, as if someone were walking past the window with a flashlight. But Helen was asleep. The windows were locked, and no one else should have been awake at that hour. He told himself it was nothing, just the light outside bouncing oddly through the curtains. But even as he closed his eyes, the shimmer grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. The house that was once their sanctuary suddenly felt different, awake, aware, as if it was watching them. Somewhere outside, beyond the bright porch light, a faint figure shifted. It stopped under the glow, looked directly toward their window, and smiled. By the next evening, the memory of the odd shimmer had almost faded from Mark's mind. He convinced himself it had been nothing more than a trick of light, maybe from a passing car. Helen laughed it off too, teasing him for being paranoid. But as the sun set over Maplewood and the familiar orange streetlights blinked on, their own porch light glowed again, steady, strong, and unervingly bright. Around midnight, the glow began to flicker. Once, twice, then again, slow, rhythmic like the house itself was breathing. Mark noticed it first from the upstairs window. Probably loose wiring, he muttered, though his voice carried a tremor. Helen, half asleep, didn't respond. He went downstairs to check the switch. The living room felt colder than usual. The hum of electricity was louder now, vibrating faintly through the walls. When he reached the front door and peeked outside, his breath caught in his throat. The light was flickering, but not randomly. It was pulsing in patterns, long and short flashes, almost like Morse code. He stood there, frozen, counting the rhythm. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. The same sequence, over and over. Then suddenly, everything went still. The flicker stopped. The light glowed solid again, eerily calm, too calm. Mark turned to head back upstairs when he heard it, a faint scrape like a shoe dragging across concrete. He froze, listening. Another scrape, closer now. He leaned toward the door, peering through the frosted glass. The light above the door dimmed for half a second, and in that brief moment, he saw a shadow standing beyond the gate. Tall, motionless, almost blending into the dark. When the light flared back on, the shadow was gone. Mark locked the door, heart pounding. Upstairs, Helen whispered drowsily, "Mark, why's the light still on?" The following night brought no peace. Mark couldn't stop thinking about that figure he'd glimpsed beyond the gate, or the way the porch light seemed to react to something unseen. He told himself it was just stress, maybe fatigue, yet he found himself staring out the window again long after Helen had fallen asleep. The night was perfectly still, yet the light outside seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat under the glass. At 1:14 a.m., movement caught his eye. Just beyond the glow of the porch, a shape detached itself from the darkness. It was tall and slender, with no clear features, just a thick, shadowy outline that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Mark's throat tightened. The thing wasn't moving toward the house, but side to side, pacing the yard slowly, deliberately, as if deciding something. He blinked hard, thinking maybe he was imagining it, but when his eyes refocused, the shape had moved closer, now standing directly under the light. The bulb above it flickered violently, as if protesting its presence. The thing tilted its head, almost curiously, as if listening to something Mark couldn't hear. Then came the sound, faint, muffled tapping on the glass. 3 slow knocks on the living room window. Mark staggered back, heart pounding. The curtain moved slightly from the vibration, and for a split second he saw it. Not a person, not exactly, but something that had eyes. Eyes that glowed faintly, reflecting the porch light like the eyes of a cat, but larger, human-sized. He reached for the switch to turn off the light, maybe to make it go away. But before he could, the light dimmed on its own, flickering until the shadow vanished into the dark. Only the echo of those 3 taps remained, faint and chilling. And somewhere outside, the faint hum began again. The clock read 3:12 a.m. when it happened. Mark had drifted into a restless sleep on the couch, his body tense from hours of unease. Helen was upstairs, unaware that the house seemed to hum again with that low, electrical vibration. The porch light, still burning, cast pale yellow lines across the curtains. Everything was silent until the knocking started. 3 soft knocks. Slow, hollow, deliberate. Mark's eyes flew open. He sat up instantly, every nerve awake. The sound had come from the front door, clear as day. He tried to convince himself it was the wind, or maybe the old wood creaking in the cold. But then 3 more knocks followed, same rhythm, same pace. He turned off the TV, and the silence after the click was deafening. He could hear his own heartbeat. The knocking came again, this time closer. Not from the door, but from the wall beside him. The air in the room grew heavy, colder, pressing against his chest. Mark took a shaky breath, stood, and moved toward the entryway. His feet barely made a sound on the floorboards. As he reached for the handle, something inside him screamed not to. Still, his hand kept moving. He pulled open the door. Nothing. Just the empty yard and that blinding porch light buzzing faintly. But then, from the far end of the driveway, he heard a whisper, so faint it barely reached him. A voice. His name. Mark. He froze. The voice came again, softer, this time from behind him. He turned, but no one was there. The knocking resumed, now coming from upstairs. Helen's scream split the silence. Mark bolted toward the staircase. The hallway light flickered violently, and as he reached the top step, the power died completely, except for the one bulb downstairs still glowing. The entire house plunged into darkness. For a few seconds, the only sound was Helen's ragged breathing and the low hum that still buzzed faintly through the walls. Mark reached for his phone, its screen throwing a dim, blue glow across his trembling hands. "Stay here," he whispered, though his voice barely held steady. He began to descend the stairs slowly, the wooden steps creaking beneath his feet. Halfway down, he stopped, because at the bottom of the stairs, one single light was still on. It wasn't the porch light this time. That bulb had gone dead in the blackout. No, this was the small lamp in the corner of the living room, a lamp that hadn't worked in months. Yet now it was glowing a soft, eerie white like fog trapped inside glass. Mark stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the lamp. The rest of the house was pitch black, but that one light illuminated the center of the room. In the glow, the air seemed to shimmer. Faint outlines like static rippled across the walls. Then he noticed something else. Someone was standing in the corner. At first, he thought it was just the reflection of the lamp, but the shape didn't match. It was too tall, too still. The figure didn't cast a shadow. It absorbed the light instead, the same way it had under the porch. Mark took a step forward. The lamp flickered. The figure shifted barely, as if it had been waiting for him to notice. Then came the whisper, that same voice from the driveway. You left it on again. The lamp burst, the bulb shattering in a hiss of smoke. The house was swallowed by blackness once more. Mark stumbled back, heart pounding, the words still echoing in his ears. And somewhere behind him, something started breathing. For a long moment, there was only darkness, thick, suffocating darkness that swallowed every corner of the house. Mark couldn't tell if Helen was calling his name from upstairs or if the sound was coming from inside his own head. His ears rang with a faint electrical hum, a vibration that seemed to crawl beneath his skin. Then, slowly, the light came back. But it wasn't from the lamp. A soft, ghostly glow began to radiate from the shattered bulb lying on the floor. The fragments of glass pulsed faintly, as if alive, breathing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Mark crouched, staring in disbelief as tiny sparks danced between the shards. And then a whisper. At first, it was distant, indistinct, then clearer. A woman's voice, low and breathy. Mark. He froze. The glow strengthened with each syllable. Why did you leave the light on? Mark stumbled backward, knocking into the coffee table. His pulse raced. Who are you? He shouted into the empty air. The reply came instantly, soft, almost sorrowful. You left us in the dark. Helen appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her phone flashlight. Mark, who are you talking to? She whispered. But before he could answer, her flashlight began to flicker, in the same pattern the porch light had pulsed 2 nights ago. 3 short. Too long. 3 short. Mark turned toward the broken bulb again. Now, within the shards, faint outlines of faces began to form, pale, distorted, eyes glowing faintly. The voices multiplied, layered, whispering in unison. You kept the light for yourself. Now we see you. The glow expanded, washing over the walls. Helen screamed as the phone light exploded in her hand, plunging them into total black. And then, from within the shards, the whisper returned, this time calm, final. Turn it off, or we'll turn you off. Silence, heavy and absolute, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder in your ears. Mark and Helen stood frozen in the darkness, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. The air felt charged, thick with static and something colder, older, that didn't belong in their home. The faint glow from the broken bulb began to fade, pulsing slower, like a dying heartbeat. Helen's voice trembled. Mark, what's happening? He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the wall switch near the door, the one that controlled the porch light. For some reason, it seemed brighter now, standing out in the dimness, almost inviting. Something inside him whispered to turn it off, but another part warned not to. The whisper came again. This time, not from the bulb, from behind him. A woman's voice. You left the light for us. Don't take it back. Helen clutched his arm. Let's just go, she pleaded. But Mark stepped forward. Every instinct screamed against it, yet his hand reached out on its own, trembling, drawn toward the switch like metal to a magnet. The moment his fingers brushed the cold plastic, the lights in the entire house flared at once, blinding, white-hot. Every bulb, every outlet, every device erupted in light. The walls seemed to vibrate, the air filled with overlapping voices whispering, "Stay with us. Stay in the light." Mark shouted, covering his eyes. Helen screamed his name. And then, click, the switch flipped down. Mr.Darkmare. The hum stopped. The air went still. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence. Then, behind them, came the faint creak of the floorboards, footsteps slowly approaching. Helen turned her phone's light on and gasped. The switch was still up, but someone else's hand was resting on it, and that hand was still glowing.